The morning sun cast long shadows across Buckingham Palace as Tom Parker Bowles stepped out of his car. He straightened his tie and took a deep breath. Today would change everything. For years, he had remained in the shadows, content to be known simply as Queen Camilla's son from her first marriage. But recent events had stirred something within him. Tom had watched his mother transform from the woman the public once scorned to the respected queen consort. He had seen her work tirelessly, support King Charles through his health challenges, and slowly win over even her harshest critics. Yet, despite her elevated position, Tom and his sister Laura had remained firmly outside the royal circle. They held no titles, received no royal privileges, and were treated as extended family at best. The catalyst for change came 3 weeks ago at a private family dinner. Tom had overheard a conversation between senior courtiers discussing the future shape of the monarchy. They spoke of streamlining, of focusing on direct heirs, of maintaining distance from those who weren't blood royals. The word stung, but what hurt more was the casual dismissal of his mother's children as permanent outsiders. That night, Tom made a decision. He would no longer accept the status quo. His mother had sacrificed so much, endured years of public hostility, and now served as queen. Surely her children deserved some recognition, some formal place within the institution she now helped lead. The next morning, Tom began drafting a letter. Not to his mother, he knew she would discourage him, always careful not to rock the boat. Instead, he wrote directly to the palace's senior advisors, requesting a formal meeting to discuss his family's position. The letter was polite but firm, outlining his case for why the Queen's children should receive appropriate titles and recognition. Word of Tom's letter spread through the palace like wildfire. Courtiers whispered in corridors, wondering what had prompted this unprecedented move. Some sympathized, understanding the awkwardness of his position. Others saw it as presumptuous, even dangerous to the careful balance the royal family had maintained. Queen Camilla learned of her son's actions from her private secretary. Her face paled as she read the copy of Tom's letter. She knew her son meant well, but she also understood the delicate politics at play. The monarchy had only recently recovered from years of scandal and public dissatisfaction. Any perception of greed or entitlement could undo years of careful reputation management. She immediately called Tom to Clarence House. The conversation was tense. Camilla sat across from her son, her hands folded carefully in her lap. "Tom, darling, what were you thinking?" she asked, her voice mixing concern with frustration. Tom stood his ground. "Mother, I was thinking of you. Of us. Of fairness. You're the queen now. Laura and I are still treated like guests at family gatherings. We have no official role, no recognition. Even distant cousins have titles and positions." Camilla sighed deeply. "You don't understand the complexities involved. Charles and I have worked so hard to what?" Tom interrupted, something he rarely did. "To keep us hidden? To pretend we don't exist? I'm not asking for a throne, Mother. I'm asking for acknowledgement. For a place in the institution you now represent." The conversation continued for hours. Camilla tried to explain the sensitivities, the public perceptions, the constitutional issues. Tom countered each point with his own arguments. He spoke of other European monarchies that had successfully integrated stepchildren. He mentioned the changing times, the public's growing acceptance of blended families. As news of Tom's demands reached other members of the royal family, reactions varied. Princess and, ever practical, saw it as an unnecessary complication. Prince Edward remained neutral, preferring to stay out of the controversy. But it was Prince William's response that would prove most significant. William had been in Scotland when he first heard about Tom's letter. He was attending an environmental conference, focusing on his Earthshot Prize initiatives. His private secretary interrupted him between sessions with the news. William's expression hardened as he processed the information. For William, the issue was clear-cut. The monarchy's strength lay in its traditions, its clear lines of succession, and its careful management of titles and positions. Tom Parker Bowles, however, well-intentioned, was not royal by blood. He had no claim to titles or formal recognition beyond the courtesy extended to him as the Queen's son. But there was more to William's reaction than simple adherence to protocol. He thought of his own children, of the future monarchy he would one day lead. Every precedent set now would echo through generations. If Tom received a title, what about Laura? What about any future stepchildren who might enter the royal fold? Where would the line be drawn? William also couldn't ignore the personal dimension. His relationship with Camilla had improved dramatically over the years, but the wounds of the past hadn't entirely healed. The memory of his mother, Diana, still cast a shadow over certain family dynamics. The idea of Camilla's children receiving royal titles struck a nerve he didn't fully want to examine. That evening, William called his father. King Charles was at Highgrove, recovering from a minor medical procedure. The king sounded tired as he answered the phone. "I assume you're calling about Tom," Charles said without preamble. "Yes," William replied. "Father, this cannot happen. You must see that." Charles sighed. "It's complicated, William. Tom is a good man. He's been nothing but supportive." "That's not the point," William interjected. "This is about the institution. About precedent. About what we represent." The conversation between father and son grew heated. Charles found himself caught between his love for Camilla, his affection for her children, and his duty as king. William remained firm, his voice taking on the steel that those close to him recognized as his most determined mood. Meanwhile, the palace machinery ground into action. Emergency meetings were called. Constitutional experts were consulted. Public relations teams ran scenarios, trying to predict how various outcomes might play in the media. The usually calm corridors of power buzzed with tension. Tom, for his part, hadn't anticipated such a fierce response. He had expected discussion, perhaps some resistance, but not the full-force institutional pushback he now faced. Friends in the media began calling, having heard rumors. He declined to comment, maintaining a dignified silence even as the pressure mounted. Laura, Tom's sister, found herself drawn into the controversy despite her efforts to remain neutral. She had never sought the spotlight, content with her life as an art curator. But now reporters camped outside her gallery, seeking her opinion on her brother's actions. She supported Tom privately but worried about the impact on their mother. As the days passed, the tension within the royal household grew palpable. Scheduled events continued as normal. The royals were experts at maintaining a calm public facade, but, behind closed doors, heated discussions continued. Camilla found herself increasingly isolated, caught between her loyalty to her children and her duties as queen. The situation reached a critical point when Tom made a second move. Frustrated by the palace's lack of formal response to his initial letter, he engaged a well-known constitutional lawyer. This wasn't a threat of legal action, such a thing would be unthinkable, but rather a signal that he intended to pursue his case through proper channels. The lawyer, Sir Reginald Hastings, was known for his discretion and his deep knowledge of royal protocol. His involvement lent legitimacy to Tom's cause and sent a clear message: this wasn't a passing fancy but a serious attempt to address what Tom saw as an injustice. The palace press office found itself fielding increasingly pointed questions from journalists who had gotten wind of the story. They maintained their standard no comment on private family matters line, but everyone knew this was bigger than typical family drama. This touched on fundamental questions about the monarchy's future. William watched these developments with growing concern. He convened his own team of advisors, separate from his father's court. They met at Kensington Palace, discussing strategies to contain what William saw as a potential crisis. The future king's position hardened with each passing day. The Prince of Wales drafted his own memo, addressed to the king's private secretary. In it, he outlined his concerns in stark terms. He wrote of the need to protect the monarchy's core identity, to maintain clear boundaries, and to avoid creating precedents that future generations might regret. The language was formal, but those who knew William could read between the lines. He would fight this with everything he had. As the first phase of this royal drama drew to a close, the battle lines were clearly drawn. On one side stood Tom Parker Bowles, supported quietly by his sister and armed with legitimate grievances and professional counsel. On the other stood Prince William, defender of tradition and guardian of the monarchy's future, with the full weight of institutional inertia behind him. Caught in the middle were King Charles and Queen Camilla, their relationship tested by competing loyalties and impossible choices. The palace, that grand symbol of continuity and tradition, had indeed begun to reel from the unprecedented demands of the Queen's son. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the modern monarchy's ability to adapt while maintaining its essential character. As autumn settled over London, bringing with it shorter days and longer shadows, the royal family prepared for battles that would be fought not with swords or speeches, but with carefully worded memos, strategic leaks, and the immovable force of Prince William's iron will. The private dining room at Clarence House had witnessed many difficult conversations, but none quite like this. King Charles sat at the head of the table, his fingers drumming nervously against the polished mahogany. Across from him, Queen Camilla's eyes were red-rimmed, though she maintained her composure. The strain of the past 2 weeks showed on both their faces. "He won't back down," Camilla said quietly, breaking the heavy silence. "Tom believes he's doing the right thing. He thinks he's protecting me, protecting our family's dignity." Charles reached across the table to take her hand. "I know, darling. But William is equally determined. He sees this as a fundamental threat to everything we've worked to preserve." The king had spent the morning in another tense phone call with his elder son. William's position had only hardened since Tom's lawyer had entered the picture. The Prince of Wales had begun mobilizing support among other working royals, building a coalition of resistance that Charles found both impressive and troubling. Meanwhile, Tom Parker Bowles continued to surprise everyone with his strategic acumen. He had reached out to several Commonwealth realms representatives, subtly gauging their positions on the matter. Some had expressed private sympathy, noting that modern families came in many forms. Others remained firmly traditionalist, aligned with William's view. The media had finally caught wind of the full story. The Daily Mail ran a careful piece, clearly sourced from someone sympathetic to Tom's position. It painted him as a devoted son seeking only fair recognition for his family. The Telegraph countered with an editorial supporting traditional royal protocols, warning against the dangers of changing established precedents. Social media exploded with opinions. Younger users largely supported Tom, seeing his request as reasonable in an era of blended families. Older, more traditional monarchists sided with William, viewing any change as a dangerous dilution of royal bloodlines. The hashtag royal stepchildren debate trended for days. Behind the scenes, the constitutional lawyers were having a field day. Sir Reginald Hastings had prepared a detailed brief outlining precedents from other European monarchies. He noted how the Swedish and Norwegian royal families had successfully integrated stepchildren, granting them appropriate recognition without undermining the core succession. The palace's legal team countered with their own research, emphasizing the unique nature of the British monarchy and the dangers of comparing it to continental systems. They cited the Act of Settlement, various letters patent, and centuries of precedent that clearly delineated who could and couldn't receive royal titles. Princess Catherine found herself in an unexpected position. While publicly supporting her husband, privately she felt some sympathy for Tom's situation. As a mother, she understood the complexities of family dynamics. During a private moment with William, she gently suggested that perhaps some middle ground could be found. William's response was sharp. "There is no middle ground here, Catherine. Either we maintain our principles or we don't. Tom Parker Bowles is not royal." End of discussion. It was one of the few times Catherine had seen her husband so inflexible. She recognized the signs. When William felt the monarchy itself was threatened, he became immovable. It was both his greatest strength and, perhaps, a potential weakness. The situation escalated when Tom gave his first public statement. It was carefully crafted, respectful, but firm. He spoke of his deep respect for the monarchy, his love for his mother, and his belief that the institution could evolve without losing its essential character. He emphasized that he sought not personal gain but appropriate recognition for all of Queen Camilla's family. The statement was a masterclass in public relations. Tom came across as reasonable, thoughtful, and motivated by family rather than ambition. Public opinion polls showed a surprising level of support for his position, particularly among younger demographics. William was furious. He saw the public statement as a breach of protocol, an attempt to pressure the family through media manipulation. That evening, he called an emergency meeting of what palace insiders had begun calling the Council of Four: himself, Catherine, his private secretary, and his most trusted advisor. "He's trying to win this in the court of public opinion," William said, pacing the room. "We cannot allow that precedent. Family matters stay within the family." His advisor, Sir Michael Pemberton, a veteran of numerous royal crises, spoke carefully. "Your Royal Highness, might I suggest that total silence could be interpreted as weakness?" "Perhaps a measured response." "No," William cut him off. "Our response will be through proper channels. I want a formal recommendation prepared for the king. Make it clear that any alteration to current protocols would require extensive consultation with the government, the Commonwealth realms, and Parliament itself. That should illustrate the impossibility of Tom's demands." As the battle intensified, unexpected alliances formed. Prince Harry, watching from California, made a rare intervention. In a private call to his father, he expressed support for Tom's position. "The monarchy needs to modernize, Pa," Harry said. "This could be a chance to show we're not stuck in the past." Charles was touched by Harry's call but also wary. His younger son's support for Tom might actually harm the cause, given the complicated dynamics at play. William certainly wouldn't be swayed by Harry's opinion. If anything, it might push him further into opposition. Princess Anne surprised everyone by remaining studiously neutral. Known for her strong opinions, her silence spoke volumes. When pressed by her brother Charles during a family lunch, she said simply, "This is your decision, not mine. But, remember, once you open a door, it's very hard to close it again." The pressure on Queen Camilla intensified daily. She found herself canceling engagements, claiming minor illnesses that everyone knew were diplomatic. The woman who had worked so hard to be accepted now found herself at the center of a controversy that threatened to undo years of careful relationship building. One evening, she met privately with Tom at his London home. Mother and son sat in his study, the room where he had first drafted the letter that started everything. "I need you to understand what you're doing to me," Camilla said, her usual composure cracking. "To us. To everything we've built." Tom's face softened. "Mom, I'm trying to secure your legacy. To ensure that your children aren't footnotes in history. Don't you see? This isn't about me wanting a title. It's about recognizing our family as legitimate." "We are legitimate," Camilla insisted. "We don't need titles to prove that." "Don't we?" Tom challenged. "Then, why are Laura and I seated with distant cousins at state events? Why are we introduced as Mr. Parker Bowles while every minor European princeling gets their full honors? You're the queen, for God's sake." The emotion in his voice was raw. Camilla saw not the successful food writer and businessman, but her little boy who had endured years of public scrutiny, who had watched his mother vilified and then slowly accepted, who had maintained dignity through it all. As October turned to November, the crisis deepened. William had successfully rallied most of the working royals to his position. The Duchess of Edinburgh, Prince Edward's wife Sophie, proved particularly vocal in private meetings, arguing that expanding titles would dilute their meaning and create impossible expectations. The government watched nervously from the sidelines. The Prime Minister received private briefings about the situation, understanding that any formal changes would require political approval. Constitutional monarchy meant that such decisions couldn't be made in isolation by the royal family alone. Tom's lawyer, Sir Reginald, had begun exploring historical precedents more deeply. He discovered several instances where royal titles had been created or adapted for unique circumstances. He prepared a second brief, this one outlining a possible compromise: courtesy titles that acknowledged family connection without implying succession rights. This proposal found its way to King Charles through back channels. The king studied it late into the night, seeing in it a possible path forward. Perhaps Tom could be granted some form of recognition that wouldn't threaten the fundamental structure William sought to protect. But, when Charles raised this possibility with William, the response was immediate and negative. "Any title is too much," William stated flatly. "It creates precedent. What happens when the next monarch has stepchildren? Or when cousins marry divorced persons with children? Where does it end, father?" The confrontation between father and son grew heated. Charles accused William of being inflexible and cold. William responded that someone had to protect the monarchy's future, even if it meant making unpopular decisions. The argument ended with William storming out, something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. Catherine tried to mediate, arranging a private tea with Camilla. The two women, both married to future kings, both mothers trying to navigate complex family dynamics, found common ground in their shared exhaustion with the situation. "I never wanted this," Camilla confided. "I've spent years trying to not make waves, to find my place without displacing anyone else's. And now..." Catherine chose her words carefully. "Tom loves you. He's fighting for you in the only way he knows how. And, William loves the monarchy. He's fighting for it in the only way he knows how. Perhaps the solution isn't about who wins, but about finding a path where no one truly loses." But such wisdom was easier spoken than implemented. As November progressed, the positions had become so entrenched that compromise seemed impossible. Tom had invested too much to back down without some form of victory. William had made his opposition so public within royal circles that any retreat would be seen as weakness. The international press had picked up the story, with European papers particularly interested given their own monarchy's various approaches to similar situations. The Spanish royal family's handling of blended families was cited as one model, while the stricter approach of the Japanese imperial family was offered as a counterexample. King Charles found himself aging visibly under the strain. His health, already delicate, suffered from the stress. His doctors privately warned that he needed to resolve the situation for the sake of his well-being. But, how could he choose between his wife's happiness and his son's convictions? Between evolution and tradition? The deadlock might have continued indefinitely, but then, Tom made another unexpected move. He announced that he would be publishing a book about his experience as the Queen's son, not a tell-all, he insisted, but a thoughtful examination of modern monarchy and blended families. The proceeds would go to charity, he said, but the message was clear: if the palace wouldn't engage privately, he would take the discussion public. This escalation changed everything. William saw it as the nuclear option, a breach of the unwritten rules that governed royal behavior. He immediately convened another emergency meeting, this time including senior courtiers and constitutional advisors. "This has gone too far," William declared to the assembled group. "Tom Parker Bowles is now actively threatening the monarchy's stability. I want options. All options." The room fell silent. Everyone understood what the Prince of Wales was implying. There were ways to apply pressure, to make life difficult for those who challenged the institution. Nothing illegal, of course, but the monarchy had subtle ways of expressing displeasure. Sir Michael Pemberton cleared his throat. "Your Royal Highness, might I suggest that such approaches could backfire spectacularly? Mr. Parker Bowles has shown himself to be quite media savvy. Any perceived persecution could generate sympathy." William's jaw clenched. He knew Sir Michael was right, but his frustration was reaching a breaking point. The young prince who had once walked behind his mother's coffin, who had learned early the cost of royal life, was now a man determined to protect the institution that had shaped him. As the meeting continued, a plan began to form. Not one of aggression, but of calculated coldness. William would recommend to his father a formal statement making clear that titles and positions within the royal family were matters of birthright and constitutional precedent, not subject to revision based on personal feelings. It would be delivered with ice-cold precision, leaving no room for interpretation or hope of change. The palace would freeze out any discussion of the matter, treating it as closed. Tom would be left with his book and his principles, but nothing more. The battle lines were drawn clearer than ever. On one side, Tom Parker Bowles, armed with public sympathy, a prestigious lawyer, and a book deal that threatened to air private grievances. On the other, Prince William, wielding institutional power, constitutional precedent, and an iron determination to preserve what he saw as the monarchy's essential nature. Between them stood a king torn between love and duty, and a queen whose attempt to blend her two worlds had created a crisis that threatened to define her legacy. The palace that had weathered scandals, wars, and social revolution now faced a different kind of challenge, the simple request of a son who wanted recognition for his family. As winter approached, bringing with it the social season and its endless formal occasions where the Parker Bowles siblings would once again be relegated to the periphery, the tension reached a breaking point. Something had to give. The question was whether it would be tradition, family unity, or something else entirely. The stage was set for a final confrontation that would determine not just the fate of Tom's request, but potentially the future direction of the monarchy itself. In the gilded halls of power, where whispers carried more weight than shouts, the quiet war between the Queen's son and the future king moved toward its inevitable climax. The ancient walls of Windsor Castle had seen many historic moments, but the gathering on that cold December morning would prove to be one of the most significant in recent royal history. King Charles had summoned what he privately called a family council, not an official meeting, but something more binding than a casual gathering. The green drawing room had been chosen deliberately. It was where difficult family matters had been discussed for generations, its portraits of past monarchs serving as silent witnesses to the delicate negotiations about to unfold. Charles arrived first, followed by Camilla, whose usual warmth seemed dimmed by weeks of stress. William entered with Catherine, his bearing military straight, his face set in an expression that courtiers had learned meant he would not be moved. Tom Parker Bowles arrived last, accompanied not by his lawyer but by his sister Laura, a strategic choice that emphasized this was a family matter, not a legal one. "Thank you all for coming," Charles began, his voice betraying the exhaustion he felt. "We cannot continue as we have been. This division is harming not just our family but the institution we serve." Tom spoke first, his voice steady but emotional. "Your Majesty, I never intended to create division. I sought only recognition for a reality that already exists. My mother is queen. We are her children. Yet we exist in a strange limbo, neither properly in nor properly out of the royal sphere." William's response was immediate and cutting. "You exist exactly where you should, Mr. Parker Bowles. As private citizens who happen to be related to the Queen. That is a privilege in itself. Demanding more is not just inappropriate, it's dangerous to everything we represent." The formality of William using Tom's surname was not lost on anyone. Catherine placed a gentle hand on her husband's arm, but he didn't acknowledge it. His eyes remained fixed on Tom with an intensity that made even seasoned courtiers uncomfortable. Laura, who had remained silent throughout the crisis, finally spoke. "Your Royal Highness, with respect, we didn't ask to be in this position. We didn't ask for our mother to fall in love with the king. But she did, and here we are. All Tom is asking for is acknowledgement that we're not embarrassments to be hidden away." Her words hung in the air. Camilla's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Charles looked between his wife and his son, seeing in their faces the impossible position he found himself in. "No one thinks you're embarrassments," Charles said quietly. "You've both conducted yourselves with dignity and grace. But, William has a point about precedent? Tom interrupted, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "What precedent?" "The monarchy has adapted countless times. You created new titles for your siblings' children. The Duke of Edinburgh title was invented for Prince Philip. The system has always evolved when necessary." William stood abruptly. Those were different circumstances entirely. They involved blood members of the royal family or consorts in the line of succession. "You are neither, Mr. Parker Bowles. And that is not meant as an insult, it's simply a fact." The two men faced each other across the room, generations and worldviews colliding. Tom saw in William the embodiment of an institution that would never fully accept him. William saw in Tom a threat to the very foundations he'd sworn to protect. Catherine, ever the diplomat, tried to bridge the gap. Perhaps we could explore options that don't involve formal titles but still recognize the unique position Tom and Laura hold. Some form of official acknowledgement, no. William's single word cut through her suggestion like a blade. Any formal recognition creates precedent. Any precedent can be exploited. The line must be drawn clearly and maintained absolutely. It was then that King Charles made a decision that surprised everyone. He stood, moving to a window that overlooked the Long Walk, where crowds often gathered to celebrate royal occasions. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of his office. "William, you speak of protecting the institution. But what are we protecting if we sacrifice family in the process? Your grandmother understood that the monarchy must be seen to have a heart. Your mother certainly understood that." The mention of Diana changed the atmosphere in the room instantly. William's face flushed. "Don't bring my mother into this," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I must," Charles continued, turning to face his son. "Because she would have understood what I'm about to do. The monarchy survived her loss not by becoming harder, but by learning to show compassion. By acknowledging that families in the modern world come in many forms." He paused, gathering himself for what came next. "I have decided to create a new category of recognition. Not titles in the traditional sense, but formal acknowledgement of Tom and Laura's place in our extended family. They will be styled as companions of the royal household, with specific privileges and recognition at family events." The room erupted. William's face went white with rage. "You cannot do this without consultation with the government, the Commonwealth realms I have consulted," Charles said calmly. "Quietly, through appropriate channels. The Prime Minister sees no constitutional barrier to creating honorary positions that carry no succession rights or formal titles. The Commonwealth realms have been informally sounded out. Most are indifferent, some supportive." This revelation hit William like a physical blow. His father had been working behind the scenes, building support while William had been focused on opposition. It was a political masterstroke that the younger prince hadn't seen coming. "You've betrayed everything we stand for," William said, his voice shaking with barely controlled emotion. "Everything Granny built. Everything I thought you believed in." Charles faced his son with sadness but determination. "I've chosen to believe that what we stand for can include compassion alongside tradition. That we can acknowledge reality without destroying our foundations." Tom and Laura exchanged glances, hardly daring to believe what they were hearing. It wasn't everything Tom had hoped for, but it was more than they'd ever had. Camilla reached for Charles's hand, her face showing a mixture of relief and concern for the rift this would create with William. "I won't stand for this," William declared. "As Prince of Wales and heir to the throne, I formally protest this decision. I will make my opposition known through every appropriate channel." "That is your right," Charles acknowledged. "But the decision is made. The announcement will be released next week, after I've informed the Prime Minister officially." William turned to leave, then stopped at the door. When he looked back, his expression was colder than anyone had ever seen it. "You've chosen them over the crown," he said. "When I am king, this decision will be reversed. Every trace of it erased. I want you all to remember that." With that, he left, Catherine hurrying after him with an apologetic glance at the others. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the ancient corridors long after he'd gone. In the days that followed, the palace machinery ground into action to implement the king's decision. The new designation of companions of the royal household was carefully crafted to provide recognition without creating constitutional issues. Tom and Laura would have formal roles at state occasions, acknowledged places in the family hierarchy, and the right to be addressed with proper courtesy. The public reaction was mixed but generally positive. Younger people especially appreciated the modernizing move, seeing it as evidence that the monarchy could adapt to contemporary family structures. Traditionalists aligned with William's view, but they were increasingly outnumbered. William's response was swift and calculated. He didn't publicly criticize his father, that would have been a step too far, but his displeasure was made known through careful leaks and strategic absences. He withdrew from several joint engagements with the king, citing scheduling conflicts that everyone knew were diplomatic. The Christmas season at Sandringham was tense beyond measure. William and Catherine attended, as duty demanded, but the Prince of Wales was a cold presence at family gatherings. He spoke when spoken to, fulfilled his obligations, but the warmth that had characterized recent family Christmases was gone. Tom and Laura, now officially recognized, found themselves in an awkward position. They had won recognition but, at the cost of creating a deep rift in the family. Tom particularly struggled with guilt, wondering if his quest for acknowledgement had caused irreparable damage. One evening, as snow fell softly outside Sandringham, Camilla found William alone in the library. She had avoided direct confrontation with her stepson throughout the crisis, but she couldn't let the situation continue. "I never wanted this," she said softly, taking a seat across from him. "Any of it. I know you believe that's not true, but I need you to hear it from me." William looked up from the book he hadn't been reading. "What you wanted and what's happened are two different things, ma'am." The formal address stung, but Camilla pressed on. "Your father loves you more than you know. This decision wasn't made against you. It was made for the family, all of the family." "There are boundaries," William replied, his voice steady but cold. "Lines that shouldn't be crossed. You of all people should understand that. You lived outside those lines for years." It was the closest he'd come to referencing the painful history between them. Camilla absorbed the blow without flinching. "Yes, I did. And perhaps that's why I understand better than most that those lines can be cruel as well as necessary." They sat in silence for several moments before William spoke again. "When I'm king, things will be different. More focused. Clearer. The mistakes of this reign won't be repeated." The threat was unmistakable. Camilla rose to leave but turned back at the door. "Your father is trying to build a monarchy that can survive in the modern world, William. Rigidity might feel like strength, but sometimes it's just brittleness waiting to shatter." As winter gave way to spring, the new arrangements settled into an uncomfortable routine. Tom and Laura appeared at state banquets and official functions, their presence acknowledged but carefully managed. They performed their roles with dignity, never overstepping the boundaries of their unique position. William maintained his Cold War against the decision. He built alliances among Commonwealth governors-general, constitutional experts, and senior politicians who shared his views. Everyone knew he was preparing for his eventual reign, when he would have the power to reshape the monarchy according to his vision. The irony wasn't lost on observers that Tom's victory had come at such a cost. He had gained recognition but lost the easy family dynamic that had existed before. Royal occasions became exercises in careful choreography, ensuring William and Tom were never left alone together, their interactions limited to the bare minimum required by protocol. Catherine worked tirelessly behind the scenes to heal the rift, arranging small gatherings where the children could play together, hoping that the next generation might bridge what their parents could not. But even she couldn't deny that something fundamental had shifted in the family dynamic. King Charles aged visibly under the strain. The son who had always been his pride, the heir he'd carefully prepared for kingship, now looked at him with barely concealed disappointment. The wife he'd waited decades to marry carried the guilt of being the inadvertent cause of the rift. The institution he'd sworn to protect and modernize seemed more fragile than ever. One evening, as he sat in his study at Highgrove, Charles reflected on the choice he'd made. Had he been right to recognize Tom and Laura? Or had William been correct that some traditions existed for good reason? The burden of kingship, he realized, lay not in making perfect decisions but in living with the consequences of imperfect ones. Tom, for his part, threw himself into his new role with determination. He used his platform to champion causes close to his heart, particularly those involving blended families and social inclusion. His book, when published, was more memoir than manifesto, a thoughtful exploration of identity and belonging in modern Britain. The book's success only deepened William's resentment. He saw it as Tom profiting from the very position he'd fought to achieve, further evidence that the decision had been wrong. In private, he began planning the changes he would make when his time came. As the first anniversary of the king's decision approached, the royal family found itself fundamentally altered. The public face remained intact, they appeared together at ceremonial occasions, smiled for photographs, and fulfilled their duties. But, beneath the surface, the ice that William had brought to his interactions had spread throughout the family. The tragedy was that everyone involved had acted from their best intentions. Charles had sought to unite his family and modernize the monarchy. William had fought to protect the institution he'd been born to lead. Tom had wanted recognition for his mother's sacrifice and his family's dignity. Camilla had tried to bridge worlds that perhaps were never meant to fully merge. In the end, the palace had indeed reeled from Tom's demands, just as the title had suggested. But it was William's response, delivered with ice-cold determination, that had truly shaken the foundations. The future king had made his position clear: tradition would triumph over accommodation, duty over personal feeling, the crown over family bonds. As the royal family moved forward into an uncertain future, one thing was certain. When William eventually ascended to the throne, the brief experiment in expansion would end. The lines would be redrawn, the boundaries reinforced, and the monarchy would return to what he saw as its proper form. Tom Parker Bowles had won his battle for recognition, but at a cost none of them had fully anticipated. The victory was his, but the war, the longer struggle between tradition and change, between inclusion and exclusion, would continue long after all of them were gone. The palace had reeled, William had answered with ice, and the British monarchy had been forever changed. Whether the change would ultimately strengthen or weaken the institution remained a question only time could answer. But one thing was certain: the family that had once found a way to heal from past wounds now carried new scars that might never fully fade. In the gilded halls where history was made daily, a new chapter had been written. It was a chapter of recognition and rejection, of progress and retrenchment, of a family divided by their different visions of what monarchy meant in the modern age. The crown, that symbol of continuity and tradition, now sat atop a kingdom where even the definition of family had become a battlefield. As Tom Parker Bowles took his place at royal gatherings, styled as a companion of the royal household, he carried with him the knowledge that his presence was both a victory and a provocation. Across the room, Prince William's steady gaze served as a constant reminder that some battles, once won, must be fought again and again. The palace had reeled, but it had not fallen. It had bent, but William was determined it would bend no further. In the delicate balance between tradition and change, between heart and duty, the British monarchy continued its eternal dance, forever adapting yet forever the same, carrying within its ancient walls the very modern tensions of a family that was both united and divided by the crown they served.